All right, thanks, Melissa. So this meeting is adjourned, or excuse me, adjourned, hasn't even started. This meeting is called to order at 10:07. It is Monday, April 7th. And with us today are Dr. Hightower, Dr. Webke, and President Haley from the board, as well as board staff and members of the Arizona Department of Education who will be presenting. Thank you for joining us today for the State Board of Education study session focusing on Arizona's Algebra 2 standards and the work happening towards multiple math pathways for graduation. The purpose of a study session is for the board to learn more about a topic via a presentation and question and answers. No voting will occur at this meeting. If the board so desires, it may direct board staff to investigate an issue or it may bring an item related to the topic to a future board meeting. Additionally, study sessions are less formal than board meetings, so board members may ask questions as they arise. There's also no requirement for presenters to use that formal language of responding. President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. This is a less formal meeting. For some context on this session, for those who may be watching the recording or the live stream, at the February 2025 meeting of the State Board of Education, Ebony McKinney, who's the Arizona Department of Education Director of Mathematics and Educational Technology, presented a request to the board to open the Arizona's Algebra 2 standards for revision. As part of the presentation, Ebony discussed that the revision of the Algebra 2 standards is part of a larger statewide and national work related to multiple pathways for high school students. The board approved the opening of the Algebra 2 standards for revision, but it did request to learn more about the process and about the work towards multiple math pathways, which is what prompted this session. I will now turn this session over to Ebony.
Well, good morning, everyone. Linda and I will go ahead and get started. We can still see the slides?
Yes.
Great. All right, so we wanted to start by sharing a little bit of background information about the Arizona Mathematics Standards. And so what you see here is state statute from December of 2027, where the State Board of Ed increased our graduation requirements from 3 credits to 4. And fourth year math credit guidance was created by the same stakeholder group who had done the update to the math standards then. And so that was done in 2008. And so I just want to clarify, in state statute, high school students are required to take Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2, and then a 4th year math course. And so when we're having this conversation, part of why we started with the ask to revisit Algebra 2 is because it is in state statute, and we wanted to really rethink about what we needed to do in order to see more students successful in that particular course. But part of that conversation also then requires us to look at that 4th year math course. And so as Arizona is a local control state, school districts get to decide what they offer as that 4th year math course. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But the idea is that they're offering students courses that are considered advanced mathematics. So A board defines that as anything above Algebra 2. And so that's typically pre-calc, AP stats, those would all automatically count as an advanced math course. But again, because it is really truly dependent on what teachers are available in districts to provide an additional year course, determines if students are getting, in fact, access to what is considered by ABOR an advanced math course. And so these 3 courses, Algebra, Geometry, and Algebra 2, are required in state statute, and so we're not asking to change that at all. We're just really looking at what is the content that's going to be covered in Algebra 2 in order to meet that requirement and set up all Arizona students for better success and options for 4th year. And so as part of the standards revision process back in 2027-28, this 4th year guidance was really focused on thinking about rigor. And I know that was a concern and a question for several of the board members. And so I wanted to share the work from that particular document. It is still available on our website. But as part of this Algebra 2 revision with the stakeholder group, we will be looking at this guidance as well and making some edits to that. But we wanted to just point out out that the whole focus of this fourth year course was really about providing students with the most rigorous math option. And again, really thinking about beyond high school and what that would look like. And so the belief of the math team now and then was really to make sure that we were providing students with 4 years of really high quality math instruction around significant mathematics. And so that the wording significant mathematics has shifted quite a bit because the world has changed, right? We're in the space and thinking about AI and data science and data literacy and quantitative reasoning. And so we really want to make sure that as we go through this process, we're setting up all of our stakeholders that are going to participate in this work and understanding that we are really looking to ensure that all kids are set up for success and that they are choosing courses that will lead to the best possible option for their dreams and goals. But it is really based on, can I leave high school and be successful, whether that is in the military or trades or career, or of course, university, whether that's community college or post-secondary. And so we really want to make sure that we're setting kids up to see themselves, as I highlighted, as capable mathematics and statistical practitioners.
I just have a quick question. I feel like during our February, thank you so much, Ms. McKinney, for your this kickoff. My understanding is that when we voted in February, it was rethinking Algebra 2 and therefore alternatives to Algebra 2. What I feel like you're now saying is that we're now thinking about that fourth course, or is
No.
it
So when we
Algebra 2 and the fourth course?
Yes. So the ask was really to revisit Algebra 2. And by doing that, then we have to think about how do we adjust the guidance for fourth year. And I believe it was board member both, I want to say Cantonese and I'm trying to think, there was one more. They both brought up the need for stats. And so there is a little bit of statistics in Algebra 2, but not enough that would maybe potentially drive more kids to consider AP stats as a fourth year. And so as we have the conversation and we bring our stakeholders together, we will be looking at what is all of the content that needs to be covered in Algebra 2 for then kids to make those decisions about what would be some better choices in fourth year. And so we really wanted to just provide a little bit of context around this work prior to this conversation. And so that's why I'm sharing a little bit of that guidance, but also the state statute that requires Algebra 2. And so it's really about rethinking what is covered in Algebra 2, knowing that there have been some additional courses in the case of particularly AP Pre-Calc, right? And so some of the content that is now in AP Pre-Calc is also covered in Algebra 2, but we know that not all kids need that, and that will allow for more time for teachers to really dig into more stats like several of the board members asked about, and really kind of dig into those foundational skills that will better support all kids across their next year and beyond. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just a little bit. And so we wanted to just make sure that we're clarifying, Arizona does not build courses, we build standards. And so by asking you all to allow us to revisit Algebra 2 standards, we are really looking at that overall progression. And so we have to be mindful of what students are getting in K-8, what is happening in Algebra 1, what is also being covered in geometry, so that there is those direct kind of through lines. When the standards were built, they were done really, really well, in that there was a really coherent progression across K-12. And so we want to be really mindful that we don't disrupt that. But what we're really looking to do is clean it up and provide a little bit more space for teachers to dig deeply into some of those more foundational skills, and then transition some of the things that are only really required for certain students that are then taking those, whether it's AP Pre-Calc, Calc, AP Stats, that kind of thing. And so we really want to make sure that that is aligned, and that that content, of course, is rigorous and it still applies to those high order thinking. So we wanted to just provide a little bit of clarity around what we mean when we say revisiting and kind of modernizing our state standards. Those standards would then drive instruction. And so schools won't necessarily have to purchase new curriculum. It will really allow teachers to use their professional content knowledge to then make decisions about choosing the most appropriate items from their current curriculum to then facilitate the learning of this course. And so for those of you who weren't here, Dr. Hightower and Dr. Webke, we wanted to just share a little bit about how we kind of got here. And again, when we talk about modernizing and revising the Algebra 2 standards, it's really looking at the recommendations made by our post-secondary counterparts, our math professors at the three state universities, as well as our pre-service math teachers, as well as their colleagues at the community college. So they spent some time looking at our Algebra 2 standards and sharing with us the things that were no longer covered even in those university courses, and they were no longer relevant due to whether it was machine learning or it was not something where it's very specific to a particular content and students would see that information in another course. But the focus, again, making sure that we're maintaining the rigor of the course and then removing those standards that are now overlapping, particularly Algebra 2 and AP Pre-Calc. But then also thinking about those pathways, which several of the board members at that meeting also had questions about. What does this then mean beyond Algebra 2? So are there any questions before I kick it over to Linda?
So thank you again for having us here, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. It really boils down to, now that the math standards have been out for quite a few years, and as we've looked at them and as they've been implemented, this is one area of focus where we see we could be doing better. And it really boils down to this overriding question is, what is the math that we want all students to know that they need to know by the time they graduate? So Algebra 1 is definitely a concept, geometry, and then concepts like quantitative reasoning, data science, statistics, and problem solving are all part of those concepts that we want to make sure that students have mastered by the time they graduate. And it's really creating an Algebra 2 course that can align with multiple pathways after the students take Algebra 2. And that's the beginning, is we have to kind of readjust this Algebra 2 class, so then we can make more rigorous courses and opportunities for students to have relevant material to take in that fourth class. So what we've done is, on the next slide, we have taken all of the concepts that are in Algebra 2 and, oh, go back a slide.
Yeah, sorry. It went into edit mode.
And just to make a visual of one, Algebra 2 is really loaded with about 10 times more information that's required than in an Algebra 1 or in a geometry class. And so we want to, one, make that a little bit more of a level playing field, so it's the same level of content, and that by freeing up and removing some of these items, that will allow teachers to get a much deeper understanding of the concepts that we leave, allowing that rigor to be maintained. And we took this slide because I thought it really does a good job of showing you where we have some of those overlaps with the Algebra 1 class, with pre-calculus, and then also with classes that are really no longer required by post-secondary institutions. And so in opening these Algebra 2 standards, this will enable us to maybe narrow down some of that overlap that we know is already being taught in other classes, that will then free up time that teachers can, as Ebony said, use that math content to really delve deeper and increase the rigor in Algebra 2 classes, that standards that remain. And then what's left over will then be pushed into some of those options that we will then develop for that fourth year math class. And I'm going to turn it over to Ebony next.
Yeah, and what I'll also say about this visual, it may not look like there's a lot of overlap, but what you have to understand is when you look at, say, stats right here, these three particular, there's really 5, so there's 3 here and then 2 on the bottom. There are pieces of each of those that need to be pulled out because they live in AP Pre-Calc, and so there's not a really clear way to kind of delineate all of the things that need to come out. And so that's the beauty of the standards revision process. We're going to bring together stakeholders from all 15 counties, from high school, from community college, and our post-secondary partners. And at this point in time, as of this morning, we've had 71 people express interest in being part of the revision process from multiple counties, and like I said, across K-12 and into post-secondary. And so the standards revision process will allow us to bring in small groups using the accordion model. And so we will bring folks in and have conversations. And then at the next month's meeting, we'll bring in some different folks. And so we're going to have this consistent overlap. And there will always be high school and post-secondary folks in the room having these conversations to make sure there's that consistency and understanding. Here's what's no longer relevant for high school students because it lives either in another high school course or it is no longer taught this way in post-secondary. And we want to allow some more space for our high school teachers to dig into the things that are really more relevant and important that will directly impact students in a positive way. And so because there was a concern or questions about rigor, I want to just reemphasize a lot of this work that we've done with our math collaborative. And so Dr. Hightower and Dr. Webke, the Arizona Math Collaborative is a group of Arizona stakeholders, and it's made up of professors from all 3 of our state universities. We have a representation from the Arizona Board of Regents. We have community college members, and we also have high school teachers, and then we have a few other folks from other organizations or math affiliates that are all part of this work. And so we've been having conversations, and we were being supported by the Launch Years Project, and I shared a resource with you through the Dana Center at UT Austin. And so they have defined rigor. And so at this point in time, there are 23 states across the US that are doing this work. And they're all focused on ensuring that students are getting the most rigorous course that will then lead to better options for a 4th year. If there's a state that has it, Arizona has that requirement. And so we're having these conversations. And so by making these edits to Algebra 2, by no means are we lowering the rigor. If anything else, we are providing more space for teachers and students to really dig in and to really build a solid foundation of all of the content that they need in order to then choose the best possible course for them in that 4th year and then beyond. And so when we talk about rigor, you've got the definition from the Dana Center in blue. I won't read that to you, you can see that, but the chart next to it is coming from the Ohio Department of Education, who also is a partner in the Launch Years work. And so they use the definition from the Dana Center to build out this chart. And so we've also shared this chart with our folks here in Arizona as part of the collaborative to really think about what is it that we're asking for? What is it that we want to see in a math classroom that'll allow for students to really build that mathematical understanding, that logical thinking, building that inference and that deduction in order to really dig into math and be able to have some really high quality conversations and apply that learning to situations that are relevant and rigorous, to be quite frank. And so we will use this work as well as some Arizona created work to really make sure that the folks who are coming into the room to really revision Algebra 2 understand that the goal is to ensure that kids are still getting the highest quality math course in Algebra 2 that will lead to even better choices beyond Algebra 2. And so we want to make sure it's very, very clear that we're not lowering the rigor. We're just really adjusting what it looks like and then adding some additional pieces. Dr. Hightower?
Thank you so much again for all your work and also for sharing information about the process and the engagement of all the stakeholders. My question is, in the group that you have of stakeholders, do you also invite middle school teachers?
We will, yes.
Okay, so thank you so much. And then I know that local control is huge in our state, but do we know the classes that are offered for that 4th year in our counties and in our state?
That is a challenge. Yes and no, to answer your question, to be completely honest. So we have a course catalog that we manage at the department, but because of local control, districts are allowed to create course names, titles, codes, and then they input them into the system. And so what could be, say, probably one of the most common is financial algebra. What financial algebra looks like in Mesa Public Schools may not be what it looks like, say, in Benson, Arizona. And so that's a little bit of a challenge. Financial algebra is also a little bit misleading because what we often find is that it is called financial algebra, but the work that's being done in that course is really middle school mathematics. It's not even Algebra 1. And so that is one of the challenges with that 4th year course because of local control, which is why, as part of this process, we want to tighten up that 4th year guidance to provide folks with some really clear expectations and understanding of why what they offer is really important during that 4th year.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hi, Jason. Carla? I'm sorry, I'm not sure who that is, but her hand is raised.
Yep, it's me. Sorry, I'm trying to do this on a phone while driving. I just wanted to appreciate the conversation on rigor. I read the stuff that you sent us, and to put it in layman's terms, what I've always been a fan of Todd Rose, and Todd Rose has always said that the problem in America is that we've equated rigor with faster and more.
Correct.
Rather than depth. So I'm trying to,
Yes.
this is how you translate it to moms, like to cut to average people. But parents are convinced that if they do 2 years in a year, if they're doing Algebra 1 in kindergarten, all that stuff is good.
It's not
And
good.
the problem is, and I've talked to so many math teachers over the years, the problem, as you guys know, is that it encouraged them really just to memorize and forget the next day, which is why they struggle the next year.
Correct.
And I met with a teacher who has taught at the most elite private schools all over the country. He's a math teacher. And I asked him just for fun, I said, if you were king for a day, what would your number one policy priority be? And you know what he said? He would never allow Algebra 1 in 8th grade.
Yeah.
That shocked me for lots of reasons, right? Because
Sure.
obviously that's a policy nationwide that we've all been striving for. He said they don't go deep enough. They don't build enough solid foundation because they're so focused on getting through content fast.
Correct.
And so it really makes me think of like the competency-based learning movement too, where we really have to demonstrate competency rather than just memorize and regurgitate and forget a couple days later. So I wanted to appreciate the conversation, but I will tell you that the documents and the stuff that you have, unless you're an educator, it's really, really hard to understand. So just from a talking point perspective, I think there's ways to explain this to other policymakers, parents, public press in a way that makes sense, because it's really getting away from the going faster and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that feedback. She's on the phone. Okay. Are there any more questions? Jason, I know you just joined. Did you have any thoughts or wonderings before we move on?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I know, again, we're here just to kind of clarify. And so what you see here is a visual from our friends at the Department of Ed in Georgia. And so their structures are very similar to our current structures. And so I'm going to ask you to ignore the advanced algebra at the bottom of the slide and really just focus on kind of the top. And so they have algebra concepts and connections, right? We also have Algebra 1. They have geometry, same as ours. And then they have advanced algebra, which is also what we consider Algebra 2. And then they go into that 4th year. And so we're looking at a very similar structure, and they've laid out some a really great visual for what they're offering as far as 4th year. And so by us making edits to Algebra 2, we will allow for better 4th year options so that kids can then make the best possible choices. And so we talked a little bit about pathways briefly in February. And so I just really want to reiterate, part of the reason for needing to revisit Algebra 2 and updating our standards is so that schools, like Dr. Howard said, we could offer better 4th year options for more kids that would lead to better choices, whether regardless of kind of what they chose beyond high school. And so a lot of schools currently offer AP Stats, but we're only seeing a small percentage of kids engage in that course because of kind of that AP component. And then there is not enough stats that is introduced in algebra and geometry and algebra 2. And so part of that revision, part of the conversation is, do we add more statistics into algebra 2 as it relates to potentially more kids taking AP stats, or potentially in the future for us to build up data science standards that will then lead to, right, because the world is changing and all of those things. And so we want to think about how are we changing algebra 2, but also then thinking about what other courses and standards do we need to revisit potentially after algebra 2 in order to set up schools and students for success. Sean?
Thanks, Ebony. I want to, this is a perfect slide to circle back to President Haley's question. Where I think the origin of it is the discussions as we had staffed the board. The board voted to open algebra 2 standards. So that's the only sort of formal action that has happened, right, is that standards revision process. But as part of the reasoning behind opening the standards, when we had staffed board members, we had talked about that multiple pathways work that you all were doing with the Dana Center. And at one point, that work was focusing on multiple pathways at that third year, at like algebra 2, quantitative reasoning, data science. And so this is a little bit of a pivot of it. Just I just want to make sure we have our table setting correctly. So right now has the work pivoted to algebra 1, geometry, a revised version of algebra 2, and then those multiple pathways would happen fourth year math, or is it still the hope of the Arizona Math Collaborative to have that pocket at junior year?
So the challenge with that is that it's in state statute, right? And so because algebra 2 is a requirement in state statute, we've backed off of that essentially because we don't want to have to engage in that process. But we also realize when we're thinking about Arizona, our 3 state universities require algebra 2 and then an advanced course beyond that. And typically what they're looking for, that advanced course has the prerequisite, if you will, of algebra 2. And so for us, we're looking to take algebra 2 and build it out into a course that will allow kids to experience multiple concepts and build that deep understanding and then lead into those other pathways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. I just I had kind of, I think, the same question. I think President Haley, that may have been, sort of where that question was as well. And then Ebony, it might be helpful for board members. Could you just reset what the current fourth credit math currently sort of looks like CTE, computer science, those kinds of things?
So for our current fourth credit, again, local control. And so honestly, it is what is available. There are very few CTE courses currently that count as a fourth year math course because it does not include high school level mathematics content. What we find often when we meet with our CTE team to look and review those courses that schools are proposing to be a fourth year is that the math is not high school level. It is typically living, honestly, in elementary school. It's a lot of computation. And we're also at a point where, you have a calculator, you have a phone, you have, spreadsheets that can do that work. And so it's not meeting the high school level content to then count as a CTE course, but there are a few. And again, the challenge there is that's if that high school offers that particular CTE course because they have someone who's certified in order to teach it. Computer science is listed as a fourth year option math course, but our computer science standards, when they were created, were not created to be a math course. And so that is also a challenge because a lot of legislators say, oh, computer science should count. But in our state, they were not built that way. And so there's not enough, again, high school level mathematics in that course for it to count. And so again, really, we're looking at only meeting the needs of kind of your top 10% of your high school students with AP stats or AP pre-calc or dual enrollment. And so by revisiting algebra 2 and giving kids exposure and more depth of understanding and learning, we're hoping that this will lead then into challenging themselves essentially and trying, say, integrated stats and quantitative reasoning or data science or possibly AP stats because they've gotten enough experience and they're interested and it's relevant. And so they're going to, put themselves out there and take that. And so our guidance revision process will happen alongside Algebra 2, so that we're really having conversations with schools, counselors in particular, about the suggestions that they're making to ensure that kids and parents understand that they're choosing the right course for the path that they're interested in. Dr.
If I
Webke?
can interrupt, it all boils down back to that rigor point. And we're finding in the 4th year, because of the way the Algebra 2 classes is set up currently, the rigor really is only in those AP courses. And a lot of on-level kids are not taking rigorous 4th year math courses. And they're taking things like financial math and things that really, to Ebony's point, right? It's computational stuff. It's stuff that's great because it gives you some economics, but it's not the equivalent rigor that a student should be taking in a 4th year of math, and it's doing them a disservice. And then it's ultimately leading to fewer choices and options for those kids because they're not challenged with that rigor in the 4th year math class, unless they take that top 10% doing the AP thing. And so we do have some, Ebony's going to share this next slide, which I'm super excited about, some of the pilots and options that we are going to give kids that will be relevant for our on-level kids and give them those ideas that maybe they didn't think about before in a 4th class that can also challenge them in a rigorous way too.
Thanks, Linda.
I think Dr. Webke had her hand up.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And I don't mean to derail the conversation here onto a whole another bird walk, but on those computer science standards, is there plans to, not standards, but the computer science class, is there any plan in the future to revise the standards for that so they become more rigorous in the mathematics area?
We don't have plans for that at the moment. Part of the challenge is, to be very frank, we don't have a lot of computer science courses being offered because we don't have teachers who are certified to teach them. And if our standards are K-12, which is great, but a lot of high schools don't even offer it because we don't have teachers who are certified to teach it. So, I mean, we would love to in the far future, but because we just don't have the staff, it's not something that we're even considering. Linda?
Totally understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I didn't have anything else.
Okay. So as we talk about kind of those choices, we really want to, like I said, and I've said repeatedly, really re-envision what Algebra 2 is, so that kids, almost think of it like a survey course, and you're getting pockets of really good information. And so we're really excited to be piloting an integrated stats and quantitative reasoning course over the next 2 school years. We'll start this summer. We have several districts in the state that are going to pilot and help develop the course. And then even more will come on the 2nd year to pilot the course. And so the idea is that it will give kids more access, right, to that in-depth study into probability, data analysis, and statistics as a way to then hopefully send them into something obviously beyond high school. And so we're excited to offer that as a future 4th year math course. We, of course, are still promoting and encouraging districts to offer AP courses and dual enrollment courses. My team and I, along with our post-secondary coordinator, Andrea Glenn, met with the folks at the Maricopa Community College District a few weeks ago, and they were having a conversation about dual enrollment. And again, the challenge there is the requirements for a high school teacher to be dual enrollment certified has shifted. And so a lot of folks who were previously qualified, if you will, to teach those courses are no longer. And so AP courses are incentivized in a way for sites and teachers. And so that's being offered. And so there's that little bit of a challenge in thinking about, the research says that students who engage in dual enrollment courses are far better prepared and successful post-secondary. But at the moment, our high schools are being incentivized to offer AP courses. And so we really want to make sure that the Algebra 2 course will push some of those kids that we're not seeing in those AP courses into those classes. And then of course, data science. Data science has kind of exploded, and it's here. We are seeing it in Arizona with all of the different plants and buildings that are going up. And so we are also thinking about, as we rebuild Algebra 2, what math in that will potentially lead to a fourth year data science course as well. And so we have a lot to consider as we revisit Algebra 2, because we really want to make sure that it is meeting the needs of all of Arizona kids, so that they're then making these choices as the best possible choice when we think about future courses. Somebody had their hand up and then it just went away.
It's me, Carla.
Okay, yes.
Hey, the same study that Helios did on dual enrollment a few years ago
Yes.
showed that so it's about 24.5% average kids taking dual enrollment in Arizona. The percent of students with disabilities was so low they couldn't report it, meaning it was less than 2%. So I would really encourage us to be putting out guidance, because there's a myth that if it's a college level course, IEPs don't count, and that is legally not true. If they're still high school students, right, their protections are still there, because we really need to get those numbers up. There's no reason a kid with ADD is not taking dual enrollment courses and getting accommodations. So I would really encourage us to be putting something out there. The State Developmental Disability Council just put out an FAQ and guidance document on dual enrollment as well that might be helpful, that I can forward to you. But less than 2% is not acceptable. I think we'd all agree with that.
Yeah. And just so you know, we have specifically reached out to several of our high school special ed teachers to make sure that they're also part of this process, because we really want to be mindful that our special education students are getting access to grade level content, which leads to a full diploma versus something that is less than. And so there's been a lot of conversations about how much they are adjusting the courses. And so we really want to be mindful to make sure that kids are getting the full content so that they have those opportunities for success.
I really, really appreciate it. But there is a very strong myth out there that if it's a college level course, they can't have accommodation. So
yeah, understand.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sean, was your hand up?
Yeah, I think Dr. Hightower's hand was up first, though.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the work that's going to go into this Algebra 2 standards for these to become more rigorous and for it to provide better opportunities and access for students. I agree also with what Carla shared right now. And with the Helios Education Data Center, they also share that there's a very low percentage of school districts in our state that are offering the AP and dual enrollment courses. And in fact, some of the districts that do, it's also not good for kids to have that access and opportunity, because students and families may not know what is required as they apply to different universities in our state, and particularly out of state. Like if they don't have calculus, they will not even be able to apply for that particular college or university. So hopefully this work will lead to more access and opportunities in that fourth year of mathematics.
Yes. Yeah. Something else that we've also had conversations about as we go through this process, or I should say, as we gear up for this process, is making sure that we're having conversations and including high school counselors so that they understand why we're pushing for some of these choices and asking districts to really reconsider, how they're modifying courses to ensure that kids are in fact getting that grade level content, and then they're making choices based on kind of where they see themselves in the future. And so we will make sure to include counselors as we kind of get into this work and then start thinking about any additional changes for fourth year. So.
Hey, Ebony, this is gonna be a loaded question. You guys are talking about fourth year math. If you go back a slide, you're talking about fourth year math with stats, with data science, maybe quantitative reasoning. Is there down the road, because it's a lot of work and a lot of money, is there an idea at some point of the department developing standards for those areas?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a really good question. And so in fact, we were just meeting because so much of the data science national standards fall in multiple content areas at this time. We are not looking to create separate data science standards, but really looking to see how can we integrate those national standards into the content areas where they already exist. And we've started working on that as a team and a unit to really, how can we address data science? How do we highlight where it already is? Maybe it's called something different, but that concept is there in, say, the science standards and the social studies standards and in the math standards. And looking at guidance and helping to align those data science standards in those core content areas, but also in other areas, because there's no reason why you can't do data science in ELA class when you're, say, looking at, say, characters, right? And you're developing character models and what's going on, and hey, who's got more of this and who's got less of this. And we're just starting that process right now. But as I was just preliminarily looking at the national data science standards, they are already in so many, almost all of them exclusively are in our science, math, and social studies, cover all of them already, with the exception, there's a few standards that are really just in the computer science realm. But other than that, everything's already in our regular content areas.
And we currently have quantitative reasoning standards for high school. We have very few teachers, unfortunately, that are engaging in those standards because they don't feel that they are qualified or have the right training for that course. And so that is also something that we're thinking about, which is why we are really excited to pilot this kind of combination, because based on what we get from that, we will potentially be able to build out our quantitative standards to a better place that will encourage more teachers to also offer it as a course. And then data science as a high school math course is something that we're also thinking about specifically. President Haley?
Thank you. That picks up right after your comment, just pricked my sort of line of questioning. Help me understand. So a point that I think I made during the February board meeting is if individuals are not ready for Algebra 2 or subsequent higher order math for their fourth year math class, how are we going to prepare our K through 8 math educators to make sure that they have the strong foundation? And if things like, or subjects like, or skills like data science, statistics, quantitative reasoning might sort of be in Algebra 2, but not currently maybe in a strong way, how are we going to ensure our math teachers in K through 8 and or in high school have the skills and preparation to be able to teach these concepts? And
Great
is that
question.
at all part of this working group and collaborative?
Yes. So that's a great question. So we as a team at the department are already thinking about that. And so we, in partnership with NAU, fingers crossed, we're in the last few phases, applied for an NSF grant to provide intense training over the summer for particularly middle school and high school teachers to really dig into what is data science and what does that look like. And even if we don't get that grant, we are also planning as a team to really think about how do we provide some professional learning for teachers around that content specifically. And we are in the process of building out a third data science convening that will really be teacher centered around the idea of what is data, statistics, and probability in our standards? What does that look like? And give them experiences and opportunities to engage in those conversations and really think about what does this look like across content areas, particularly for our K-5, but also applies to our 8-12. But we're really thinking strategically about how do we better support in those areas specifically, knowing that it is something that is very fast moving and it's not going away. And so we really want to be thoughtful about what we can provide for them. And so making sure, right, like we have middle school teachers part of the Algebra 2 revision process algebra teachers, geometry teachers, pre-calc, all of those folks are in the room, and we're all thinking about our end goal is Algebra 2. And so what are the things that we need to consider prior to and then after as we build out this course? Hopefully that answers your question.
I guess I'm taking a little, the state board over the last year had a K-3 literacy working group, and there's been a huge emphasis on trying to support our early educators on the science of reading. And so my question would be, as you think about your plan, is there a similar strategy you all might be able to employ to come alongside those educators so they have the training, not just once in the summer based on a grant, but it's a long-term strategy? Because it's not, you get the support one summer and now you're the expert, but I think what we have learned in lots of other subjects that it takes a while, and you might get it today, but just like I took advanced math in college, I think some of my math educators here could have benefited from lots of professional development and training, because there were some subjects or some concepts that I did not fully understand, and it showed up as a result in, AP calculus and subsequent courses. So it would be really helpful as you think about it, what kind of training is needed for our educators in K-8 so that they really have that strong foundation, particularly for educators that say, I'm a English language arts teacher, I feel really confident in that, and less so in the math side.
Yeah.
Do we sort of think through bringing in math experts to come in and teach the math class? I've seen that done in various schools where they have really a math content expert, and they teach K-5 math across subjects, and so others can focus on their strengths. Or do we have the SWAT team that comes in and helps provide, and you get your credentials or your hours, and sort of you feel more confident in teaching these subjects, so our students have the long-term foundation in order not only to take Algebra 1, but take Algebra 2, but then also be ready for statistics, be ready for quantitative reasoning, be ready for data science, whether it is in the high school or in a dual enrollment course, or long-term if they pursue post-secondary academics.
Yeah. So we had a conversation with our friends at First Things First and Read on Arizona. And so the challenge is funding. A lot of states who are doing this work already to support early numeracy have entire units added to their teams at the Department of Ed's. Right, the success that Alabama saw on NAEP is years of work and funding, and it really was best practice. I mean, they were not doing anything extraordinarily out of the ordinary. It was really just funding, elementary math coaches at every single site. And so we are thinking about that, knowing that our system currently doesn't have any funding. And so partnering with some of our organizations who have done the great work in literacy to think about how could they potentially offer some support for early numeracy. But again, it's a big part of that is having the funding and the staffing to make that happen. But it is something that we are well aware of, and we are trying to kind of bridge that gap in the best way that we can with the current funding that we have.
But I think also but just if additional funding is needed, I think it's thinking through what is needed and making that compelling case. Yes, there's a defined amount of dollars, but if the defined amount of dollars is to, whether it's early literacy and ensuring that our K-3 our K-3 teachers have a literacy endorsement, or it's that we really need to have exceptional math coaches that are in the K-5 or K-6 middle school, et cetera, well, then we need to make the compelling case, because if our kids are not strong in all of these subject areas, it's limiting them to the opportunities down the road. And it's not just, oh, I'm going to pursue the skilled trades. The skilled trades today are highly technical. And if you
Yes.
don't have a strong mathematic foundation, the likelihood you're really going to understand welding or electrical, if you're going to work on my HVAC system, it's far more complicated than just, nuts and bolts. And so if we need to make the case that more resources need to be directed to ensure we have a strong foundation, well, I think I would encourage you all to have that growth mindset of like, we need to it needs to be a both and. It shouldn't just be one at the expense the other. We need to bootstrap this. So
For sure.
I would
Absolutely.
agree with you completely on that. And in fact, it is something that our team has already identified and recognized that we need to start bringing awareness to the issue and putting forward things like a decision package to create, math coaches for teachers in grades, 4 through 6 or something to that effect, right? And there are other states, to Ebony's point, that have done this already and looking to see, just like we did for literacy, but how can we mimic that and use what we've learned for that early literacy where we're starting to see some progress? Like, how can we use that for early numeracy and making kids both, to your point, it's not an either or, it's that kids can be strong in both literacy and numeracy. And so we are actually actively looking at decision packages in our budget and starting to make those kinds of requests known and bringing attention to it, because that's the only way we're going to get started with that is highlighting it, that there's this need out there and we have some ideas and thoughts and plans going forward.
One other point I'll make, President Haley, is because of the Arizona Math Collaborative, we've built partnerships with our post-secondary colleagues. And so we are already having conversations about how we can tap into their expertise to help support our high school and middle school teachers in building their content knowledge. And so looking at ways to partner and provide that professional learning to support teachers as they continue to learn and grow, and really think about how we can better collaborate in the future.
I'm gonna have to jump in a second, but I think that's awesome. I might also encourage industry conversations, particularly at the end of the day, this is the applied math. So if we're having a conversation with Taiwan Semiconductor and you need, advanced manufacturing or, any of the number of different industries that are growing and that are new to the Valley, and well, across the state, frankly, it's across the state. I think it would be really important to involve them, because it's not just I'm going to take this math class and maybe I'll pursue post-secondary, but it's that long-term application. So I'm glad you're having the conversations with post-secondary, but involving the workforce, I think, would also be really important.
Absolutely. Carla?
I couldn't agree with Chairman Haley more, but I'm going to circle back to this is why we've really got to think about messaging. Because everything I read, and even a lot of you're only going to understand it if you're an educator. So you've got to be able to figure out how to communicate this in plain language. There are still a lot of people, especially a lot of parents, who still think the problem is Common Core math, and we need to go back to the way things used to be. And really being able to communicate what the goal of this initiative is, why we need to do this in a way that makes sense to non-educators is going to be critical, especially if you're going to pursue a decision package.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If I may, Ebony,
Yes.
in my training in K-12 for 28 years, it had always been ingrained in us that algebra in middle school was a gateway subject, that it is a must that you need to have. Now, it was a complicated thing to do because 8th grade math had a lot of standards, and then of course algebra has a lot of standards, so we had to offer both classes, and many times the students would do really well and pass the algebra test that was aligned to the high school test, but not do well in 8th grade mathematics. So I know our fellow board member Krivik has said that there was an expert that said don't teach it in 8th grade, but from our training, it has been completely the opposite. So it would be good to get some studies, because it is such a complicated thing to do anyway within the schedule and within the staffing and personnel on, and then also with the alignment for coherence with the high schools, because we have so many K-8 school districts in Arizona. that it would be good to find out, okay, what does the research says, because this is what we have been really trying to accomplish for so many years.
Absolutely. That is a mixed bag of research, I will be quite honest. But we can pull that and share that with you all as well, because it is, yeah, like you said, it is a little bit of a challenge. And because our standards shifted a few years ago, a lot of what used to be covered in Algebra 1 is now covered in 8th grade, which is probably why those kiddos were struggling with 8th grade and being successful in Algebra 1, because things got moved around. And so I think we have to do a better job as a state team to clarify what those shifts were, because middle school mathematics, all 3 years, is really, really vital in order for kids to be successful in Algebra 1. And a lot of things have shifted. And I don't know that when those standards changed back initially in 2010, that was done really well to help kind of facilitate that conversation. And I know we are out of time, and there was a question about the assessment. Linda, I don't know if you want to jump on that real quick, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, so just real quick, I know some concerns were addressing, will this make any changes to the assessments for high school? And because the ACT and SAT, for that matter, neither one of them are aligned to Arizona standards. They are actually aligned to a lower level of math. So any changes that we make to Algebra 2 will not affect or impact the assessments on the ACT, the math portions on the assessments for the ACT or the SAT for students. So we don't foresee that being a problem at all.
All right, and that, I think, takes us to the end. So
any final questions from board members?
No final questions. Thank you so much for your work and providing the background and answering questions as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Ebony and Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to do the study session for the board. It was really helpful, clarified quite a bit, and we'll follow up, if there are questions or, but this was unbelievably helpful. We're really thankful for your time, and we'll adjourn this meeting at 11:04 a.m.